So let's go into how to solve some of these. Some of these are just you're just guilty. You know you're doing it and you're guilty, and that's that. Okay. Most of these aren't. Most of these I found to be treatment frequency fraud, therapy fraud. Um, those are the most types of frauds that I've seen. And then even billing for different services, but usually a higher end service like therapy or an exam without the sufficient services delivered. And I typically have found that most of the time that's ignorance also. The doctor just didn't know any better. So let's go into, and then one of the big reasons for fraud is what I talked about is the doctor doesn't want to charge the patient the same amount. He doesn't want to charge the cash patient or the major medical patient $3, $4, $5, $6,000 that he's going to get for a PI patient. He just doesn't want to do it. Doesn't have the conviction, doesn't have the ability, all that kind of stuff. And so here you go. Now you got problems. You got problems. So you have treatment frequency fraud, therapy fraud, and it's too easy to find out. So how can you do that? How can you deliver it and still make it affordable? Well, here's how. Deliver, and see, also, I didn't have two different systems. A lot of doctors, and when you get subpoenaed, they'll find this out. A lot of doctors have one system of documentation for personal injury cases. In others, they'll pay more attention because they know it's going to be looked at or could go to court or whatever. And then they have a crappy, totally different system for major medical and cash. They don't even really pay attention. They may just put the date down and that's it. Okay. That's fraud. So you got to be careful about that. Now, let's go into how to handle that. So how can you, well, here's what you do to not do therapy fraud, frequency fraud, all that. Okay, so here's how you do that. You want to do the services that you would do, whether it was a cash patient, Medicare patient, major medical, personal injury patient. Now, of course, with the personal injury patient, you'll get paid for that and all that. Okay, let's go back to how you can do it without blowing the patient out of the water financially and all that stuff. So what you do, because remember, clinically, you're supposed to deliver the same services for similar conditions. That's what you're supposed to do clinically. And you can't do fee splitting. So how can you make it? So how can you do that? See, it's a legitimate question, because do you really want to charge a cash patient $5,000? Most people don't, but they won't have any trouble charging a personal injury case $5,000. And I'm talking about the same injury, similar injuries, all that kind of stuff. So what you do, number one is, and don't have different documentation systems. That's number one. Like my patient education system was based on the science of the three phases of healing. It didn't matter if you were a Medicare patient, a cash patient, or a PI patient. It didn't matter. That's what it was based on. There was no difference. The documentation was the same. So whatever I wrote down. Now, what wasn't, I didn't do functional capacity indexes, that kind of stuff that you need extra for the PI patient. So that was probably the only thing I didn't do. But as far as therapies and frequency of visit, you look at my records, you're going to see the cash visit, you're going to see the same frequency of visits. You're going to see the therapies, the same therapies as the PI. But how was I able to do that and make it affordable? Well, this is how. So do the same frequency, do the same system, do the same therapies, and then what you do is you give the patient the discount. Now, that's not fee splitting. And how you make it legal is you either use what's called a hardship agreement or a time of service agreement. And let me go into the basics of those two and which one you should use and why. The time of service agreement is designed to give the patient a discount if you don't have all the other associated costs with billing, administrative cost, stamps, envelopes, pencils, pens, everything related to billing, okay? Labor. Okay, so that's called a time of service, and that's when the patient actually pays at the time of service because you don't have these extra administrative costs. Now, here's the pros and cons about that is it still has to be within a percentage, a legitimate percentage of your administrative cost. So let's say we look at your overhead, and this is what happens when you go to court. When you get charged, this is the detail stuff that comes out, the nasty stuff that you don't want out if you're doing it wrong. So what happens is the administrative fee that you saved is only supposed to be the amount of discount you're given. So if your administrative fee was 15% of your overhead, then you're only supposed to give around a 15%. If you gave 17%, something like that's not going to be a big deal, right? You always got to think of it as how's the jury going to see it? That's always the end answer because that's ultimately what they have to prove. But if your administrative costs are 15% and then you give a 85% discount, well, that's a problem. It's not supported. And that's not legal. So the time of service discount, I don't use, and I didn't use for those reasons. Not only the amount of discount that I could give, but also they had to pay at that time. Okay. So that's the reason, those are the guidelines with the time of service discount, the amount of discount relative and proportional to your administrative fees. All right. Let's go to the hardship discount. That's the one that I suggest using. Well, what are the guidelines with hardship discount? Does the person have to ask for a discount? No. Do they have to show their check stubs? No. Do they have to show their tax returns? No. What's the only guideline for you to give and offer a hardship discount? You believe the patient would not have been able to receive the services without it. Let me say that again. In other words, it's based on you. It could be based on the patient's reaction, their facial expression, their tone. In other words, the patient didn't have to say anything about, I need a discount, okay? Because we're in the business of helping people, not checking their W-2, their tax returns to see if they can afford care. So that's where you're going to have the most flexibility, number one. So you can apply it at will. In other words, if you think that it's too much for that person to afford, well, it's your opinion. And number one. Number two, you can give whatever discount you want. You're not limited by an administrative discount. You're not limited by a time of service. In other words, they got to pay at that time. You can do terms. And that's what we did. So we did clinically everything approximate to the personal injury patient relative to this, the same findings. Okay. That's what keeps it legal. And then what we did to make it affordable legally is we just offered them a hardship discount. Now you have to have it documented. So we just had a sheet of paper and we just put our recommendations down. We put the normal cost that it was, and whatever we agreed upon, whatever the fee was on the payments, the terms, we just put it in there. That was it. It didn't matter if it was a 50% discount, 70% discount. It didn't matter. And that's what I did with my patients too. That's a whole nother, program, patient education and all that. But we would go over all the treatment. We'd have the patient pick the services they wanted after they were educated. We'd add up all the fees. The fees were the same. We didn't change therapies and frequency and all that. And then we gave them a discount for prepaying or agreeing to care. In other words, terms. And then we would have them sign the hardship discount. That's how it worked. And when we did the discount, and I'm not going to, I teach this with patient education, and it's a whole different story, but I'm just trying to share some basic light on this, how to make it all legal. And then when we gave the discount, we just put it in there, time of service discount. And then even if the patient couldn't afford that, we always had a system to make it affordable. We never turned the patient away from care, ever. I never turned a patient over to small claims court, ever. So that's how we make it affordable, is there's tiers. And the bottom line is we would get to the bottom tier after we went through 2 other tiers, and we would just go into, if they wanted the care, first of all, what could they afford, A, or they may wanted an abbreviated version of the care. Maybe they didn't want all 3 phases of the care. It was one of those 2. But we got the agreement. And then we had them sign the hardship discount. And that's what makes it legal. Now, is there a percentage of hardship discounts? Some people say, well, that depends on the economics of your area, what percentage of poverty. No, everybody spends their money differently. You have people that you can have somebody who's in poverty that has more cash in their pocket than somebody who's making a 6-figure income and a credit card debt over their head. And those are 2 totally different socioeconomic classes. So it has nothing to do with the socioeconomic class percentage within your area. Nothing to do with it. It has to do with the individual. So that's what we did. That's how we made it affordable. And by the way, that's the goal. The goal is for you to help people, not turn people away. And this is how you do it legally. Do the hardship, do the recommendations. Don't have a different system, number 1. They find out you have a different patient education system of regular patients versus PI patients. That's fraud. They find out you have a different frequency system. That's fraud. They find out you have a different therapy system. That's fraud. These are the common frauds that are being done by chiropractors, and they don't even know it. And it's too easy to pull your records and find it out. And remember, is there a certain criteria? No. The criteria is whether they want to charge you or not. Now, first they'll go for the money. The insurance companies want the money back. The DOJ, they want to stack their crimes. Remember, they get bonuses and raises by the number of cases they can charge, the number of convictions, and the amount of jail time. That's how that works. And so it's totally their opinion. And their opinion is based on whether or not the time, effort, and energy is worth it versus the return, essentially is what it'll come down to. So you don't have to be the big player, the big dog, multiple offices. You don't have to be that at all. Matter of fact, if you have a big name in the community, but you don't have a big office and you're not generating, they could go after you just because you have a big name in the community and they want to create a ripple effect. They want that to go out. So anyway, that's how you legitimately, some of these are just blatantly fraud and you're doing them and that you just deserve what you get. Most of these are not. Most chiropractors that commit fraud don't even know they're committing fraud for the different reasons that I covered. But that's what you do. Don't have different services. Don't have a different documenting services. Don't have different therapies. Don't have different patient education. Don't have different frequencies of care. Base everything, and that's what it should be based on. It should be based on, the science of the 3 phases of healing and their biomarkers, period. That's it. If it's not based on that, it's fraud. That's what it should be based on. Every patient, it doesn't matter if it's a cash or major medical or personal injury, period. And then give the discount, give the hardship agreement discount. That makes it affordable. And then I just had tiers. I would start here. They couldn't do that. I would do this. And then the bottom line is I just go, well, what can you afford? If they wanted all 3 phases, what can you afford? Boom. I'm signing it's legal. I'm making it affordable. I'm not losing patients. Or maybe they didn't want all 3 phases of care. Or it could be a combination of both. They didn't want all 3 phases and they couldn't afford that. See, so I'm going to modify it, but they're going to get everything the same clinically. That's the key. Clinically, everything has to be not differentiated based on money. That's the difference with fraud right there. And so to make yourself a little bit more bulletproof is you can do all those services. You can, but if you're going to do very frequency therapy and all that. Well, you're headed to trouble. You're headed to trouble. So do them all the same, cash, major medical, whatever. Base your education the same. Keep your documentation the same. Don't have a different documentation system. That's a clue right there. You're committing fraud. And then just give the discount and make the discount legal with the hardship agreement. That's it. That's how you can do everything legally. Do it right, man. You don't need to do it any other way. There's plenty of business out there.